show a uniform grid planning. Now, grid planning is seen in Mohenjo-daro, in Nausharo, but there may not be such regular planning as has been pointed out. For example, Posel points out that in case of Mohenjo-daro, the first street which was considered as the north-south thoroughfare can be made out. The second street can be confirmed, but the northern and southern east-west streets may not be confirmed through archaeological evidence. Then inside the major blocks of many of these streets, there are some doglegs and dead ends. So the streets were not as well aligned as it was made out to be. Also, it is seen that many of these streets and avenues, which are called, they have these walls, and these walls are pinching in on the streets and avenues, and these are getting narrower and narrower. Despite these imperfections, definitely the town planning and architectural components were absolutely remarkable. There is no doubt about that. And Jansen, who has worked elaborately on the urban architecture, points out to a remarkable aspect, that is the construction of platforms. Now, another thing that we are finding in Harappan town planning is the brick-lined wells. Now, the layout of many of these wells were done when the original platform was laid out, and these wells continued unchanged throughout the mature Harappan phase. They show a remarkable continuity. Now, the area covered by each well and the average distance between each of these wells is consistent, therefore pointing to this fantastic planning of the Harappans. Then we come across this elaborate drainage system, for which you have ample evidence from Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Kalibangan, Nausharo, Lothal, and many of these sites. At Mohenjo-daro, you have drains at all levels of the sites. You not only have street drains, but also drainage system in the houses, in the domestic space, which was connected to the street drains.
This is the bathing facility found in Mohenjo-daro. Some say that it was for ritual bath, others say that it was for elites only, and still others have doubts about both these conjectures. Nevertheless, it indicates the advanced nature of a civilization.
What is this Great Bath? You are all familiar with visuals of the Great Bath. It's basically a water tank which was enclosed by brick paved walls, brick paved galleries, and brick paved colonnades. Now, this huge tank was had an area of 12 into 7 meters and a depth of almost 2.4 meters. On the outside of the tank, you had a covering of about 3 centimeter thick of bitumen to make it waterproof. Then we come across 2 staircases from opposite sides of the Great Bath leading to the bottom of the tank. So this is very interesting, this entire structure, architecture of the Great Bath. There were rooms on the north and east of the Great Bath, and in one of the rooms there was a well, which was possibly that was the source of water for the Great Bath, and this water was changed from time to time. So from the nature of its architecture, from the nature of its planning, it's possible that it was meant for some special ritualistic purpose. Now, when you come to the domestic structures, Mohenjo-daro definitely gives the best example. How can we talk about these houses? Archaeologists have talked about these houses, which consist of rooms irregularly spaced, closing in on one or more than one courtyards. Now, these courtyards were used for more than one purpose. Collection of workshop debris, manufacturing debris have been made from part of the courtyards, which some kind of household production may have carried out there, and this was also used for cooking purposes. The houses were very solidly built. The walls were more than a meter to about 2 meters thick. Then you come across doors and windows. Of course, windows, the construction of windows, it's doubtful, although some scholars have talked about it. And you hear about staircases. People talk about these staircases which lead up to possibly an upper story. So you can make out that one is getting well constructed houses. A large house of nearly 300 square meters would have about 20 rooms closing in on a courtyard. Now, apart from these houses, you come across 16 two-room quarters which were called the coolie lines by Wheeler. Now, apart from these domestic houses, or domestic structures, we also come across some special purpose buildings. Now, I have already mentioned initially that about the segregation of space of these urban centers, that often Acropolis to the west, where you have Acropolis or Citadel to the west, and the lower town. So, we have already seen that such segregation of space is not there at all the sites. Now, what is this citadel? It was basically it was basically a fortress adjoining the settlements, and it was meant for defense purposes. Now, as I already mentioned, that this segregation of space was not noticed everywhere. At Mohenjo-daro, Mitathal and Kalibangan, you see such a segregation of space. You don't see it in Harappa, Banavali or Lothal. Now, let us take of Mohenjo-daro, which is the most well recorded here. The citadel here enclosed certain high walls and towers, and we come across these special buildings within this citadel. You all know about the Great Bath, about the Pillared Hall, elite residences and the granary. Now, close to the Great Bath, one comes across this huge platform on which there are these 27 smaller plinths separated by narrow passages and arranged in 3 rows of 9 each. From the nature of these structure and seeing a similar structure at Harappa, archaeologists have come to the conclusion that this is the granary.
Another important structure is the pillared hall. There are 20 thick pillars arranged in 4 rows of 5 each.
So, this has been called the palace of the elites, basically. This is what the Harappan citadel and these structures looked like. Now, if we look into the planning of the other cities, we see that Harappa also had a lower town and a citadel. The citadel had granary and some 2 gateways. Kalibangan was rebuilt completely during the mature Harappan period. Chanhu-daro can be called as a lower quarter, as one of the lesser quarters of Mohenjo-daro. There you have ample evidence of beadworking, and Lothal has been mentioned as a port with a dockyard. There also which is controversial, there also you're finding evidence of different craft working. Now, one of the most spectacular discoveries of recent times is the site of Dholavira in the Great Run of Kutch, which spreads over an area of 60 hectares. Here too you have the citadel with an outer court, and which is connected to the middle town. All are bounded within this open walled system, where in one place you have the lower town. So, here also in Dholavira also you find all features of Harappan town planning. Most of these buildings and the structures, walls, they were made of mud brick. Inside the citadel, inside the town, one finds that there is a tank, a water tank, which was lined by stones and it had lime plaster. So, this in brief is giving you an idea of the urban form planning, the architectural pattern of the Harappan system, and I tried to point out the differences between the major cities, how Mohenjo-daro is often taken as the type site, and how there are other sites which do not always fall into this pattern. But there are certain unitary features, certain cohesive features of urban planning which ties Harappa. Now, the next aspect that we take up is the Harappan script. Now, you must be already aware of the fact that the Harappan script is still undeciphered. What is the script basically? Do you have alphabets here? Not really. You are having, it is called logographic. So, you are having 375 to 400 signs without, and there is a complete absence of alphabet. Where are you finding these signs? The signs are found in, they are inscribed in seals, in tablets, in clay tablets, in tools, in pots, in jars. Some goblets have been found from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro where these seal impressions have been found. So, you can make out how interesting this a reading of the script would be, because that is going to throw light on more aspects of the Harappan civilization about which we do not know. When you are finding it on a seal, what do you think it could designate? Mainly, perhaps, the name or and designation of the owner. When you are having a pictorial emblem, then one perhaps gets to know more about the possibly lineage, ancestry, or the social origins of that particular individual. So, although the script remains undeciphered, but you would agree that writing is one of the most momentous discoveries of mankind, and there you have that thing was already there in the Harappan civilization. Now, the next aspect that I would like to dwell on is, of course, Harappan art. What are the objects that immediately come to mind when we are talking about art?
Art can be defined in many ways. The modern definition is simple. It is an expression of a creative skill. It indeed is an expression of a skill, but in ancient times, it may have been a livelihood for some.
When we are talking about art, we find that animals form the chief items of representational art. However, you do have depictions of foliage in pottery, carvings of animals like tiger, rhinoceros, bull, elephants have been seen in intaglios on steatite seals, and they are really examples, illustrations of brilliant craftsmanship. Animal figurines have been found, but they are not of very good workmanship, mainly in clay and faience. The bull forms the most important item among these clay figurines. Apart from these, some bronze and stone artifacts have been found, made of bronze and stone, and here you find that you get some beautiful examples of buffalo and goat. The rendering of people in clay or faience was not as great as seen in stone or steatite. I have already mentioned about the priest king in some other context, which is basically a figure connected with the elite class in a seated posture. So, the style is very static and formal and can definitely be marked by the very superior craftsmanship. Then we come across the famous dancing girl and several animal figurines, which are illustrations of the lost wax process. Apart from these, a small corroded female figurine has been found, but there is more stiffness in physique in this figuring that you are not seeing in the beautiful dancing girl. Most of these items have been found from Mohenjo-daro, but the context of the dancing girl is not really known. Now, after discussing art, another thing that immediately comes to mind would be religious aspects, because we will see when we will talk about religion that how these two might be linked. Now, how does one talk about religious system of a Bronze Age economy like that of the Harappas? Sometimes it's a problem when you are trying to find the roots of Hinduism in some of these objects. For example, the horned deity surrounded by animals, which is one of the most notable examples that has been found, and this deity, this so-called figure, has been interpreted as prototype of Shiva as Pashupati and sitting in an yogic posture. Now, such interpretations cannot be accepted anymore. In fact, Shirin Ratnagar is pointing out that such figures may have been just associated with the religious system, but you cannot trace back Hinduism to such figures. Another important aspect that needs to be studied when you are considering the religious system of any society is the nature of burial, the nature of after death rituals, rites and rituals which might be connected to beliefs in afterlife. The Harappans generally buried their dead. We also come across some post-cremation or symbolic burials, that is pots and burials basically, where you are not finding the various bodily parts. And we see that when the Harappans were buried, the head pointed to the north, and you are finding, one is coming across various grave codes associated with the burial, like pots, ornaments, tools, etc. So these bear some kind of significance if one was to talk about afterlife. Now, very rarely, it's very difficult, in fact it's quite abstract to talk about religious symbols, concepts from depictions on pots, seals, different kinds of tools, etc.
It cannot be denied that Indus civilization had some kind of a belief system, but linking it to any present religion may not be warranted. We simply do not have sufficient data for it, and we should not look at the artifacts of the Harappan civilization from our perspective. They may have had other significance which we are not yet aware.
There are numerous figurines which have been interpreted as mother goddess by some. However, the nature of these figurines and the context and their context has prompted a few other scholars to say that perhaps there is nothing very strictly religious about these figures, nor can we really determine whether they were used as votive figurines. Now, you are coming across some of these figures seen in seals and various other cases where you have a combination of the human body and animal head, tail and hoofs, or a combination of animal and human torsos. So they have, we think they have some kind of a significance when it comes to interpreting the past, the beliefs of an ancient society. Now, apart from these examples, you are also coming across some structures like some architectural which show real architectural splendor, like the Great Path. This is possibly this was a seat of ceremonial and public worship. Now, other than such ceremonial seats of ceremonial and public worship, there may have been the presence of local cults which may have had their seats below some trees. However, there is no archaeological evidence for that. Now, apart from these, 7 fire altars have been found at the site of Kalibangan. These have cavities of which show ash and terracotta cakes. There is a clay column rising from the center, drain, well, and some bones have been found from these places. So it is surmised that some kind of ritual took place in these fire altars, which show a combination of ablution, ritual, sacrifice, etc. The most interesting part of course, is the nature of depiction of animals. We have already seen there's a wide depiction of animals on seals and various other material objects. What does the depiction of animals really mean? We see that apart from bulls, most of the animals which are represented, they are wild animals: tiger, rhinoceros, gharial, elephant, etc. So they may have had some shamanistic association. We also see that we have reference to these horned mythical beast which is appearing in many of the seals, and they are open to multiple interpretations. So there are these various seals where you find the inscription on one side, seals, tablets, inscriptions on one side, and on the opposite side there is this mythical horned figure dressed in leaves or depiction of some animal, and these can also be used as reference points to understand the religious beliefs, the religious system of the Harappans. Certain material items which perhaps had some religious association are these ivory rods with dot and circle incisions, talismans. Some of the shell ornaments could have been used as talismans. Then the depiction of drum on some of the seals, cylindrical perforated jars. So these are some of the items which may have had some religious association. You also come across this another kind of horned figure with pigtails sitting in the peepal tree, and this could have been some kind of a spirit who had some association with the religious beliefs. We have already looked at some of these mythical creatures, the so-called Pashupati or figure in yogic posture. So these various figures can be taken as representing past beliefs and customs. You also have these various figures of fish. Animal motifs I've already mentioned, and all these possibly formed a part of a religious system which was primitive or semi-primitive, and this is how we can actually talk about the Harappan religious system. A little too abstract, but there is nonetheless a lot of evidence which does show some indications to past belief and customs. We have already talked about the priest king. Now here one thing to be noted is such labels like the priest king were used by colonial archaeologists, and they are actually reflective of the European attitude towards the Orient, because this might not have been a priest king at all.
If there was such a complex mechanism in a society, there definitely must have been some form of social organization. How was it organized in Indus society?
From whatever idea you have formed about the Harappan civilization, one thing is clear, that there is evidence of, for example, in the nature of organization of space of some of the cities, there is evidence of some kind of difference. So scholars have talked about social segregation based on differences in urban space, like you have the houses with elaborate facilities and the so-called coolie lines. Then you have the material evidence of various distinctive seals, which scholars have interpreted as evidence of private property. Now, if a social organization based on some hierarchical arrangement, based on some class segregation existed, then it must have operated through some controlling authority. And there we have to talk about the political status of the Harappan system. Some scholars have said that there was a state, others have said that no, it was a proto-state. So there is still a wide-ranging debate on that. But what is clear is some kind of a controlling authority is seen in maybe the town planning, in the way that no encroachments were allowed to be made on streets, in the very well planned drainage system. A controlling mechanism is seen in the widespread use of distinctive seals, in the script which still remains undeciphered, in the universal style of pottery despite regional variations, in the universal system of weights, in the standard size of the mud brick and the fired bricks. So as to how this political control, how the mechanism, how it worked, we do not know. But there was some kind of a controlling authority, and this is the kind of material evidence that archaeologists talk about. So when we are talking about political control, archaeologists cannot say anything about which was the capital. We come across citadels in about 15 to 20 of the Harappan sites, so possibly there was a hierarchy of seats of power among the towns. But beyond that, nothing can be said with a lot of certainty. Shireen Ratnagar has talked about a political system which was based on tribal foundations. That was the foundation on which the Harappan centralized controlling authority was based. However, unless the script is deciphered, nothing more conclusive can be said about the nature of polity or the social organization.
So, we have seen architectural patterns, the Indus script, art and religion, and also the social organization. While we can make many conjectures, unless the script is deciphered, nothing conclusive can be arrived at about this great civilization.
Good morning, students. Today the focus of our study is on demand and the determinants of demand. But before we take up these two terms, let us first understand the term markets. Why markets? Because market is a characteristic phenomena of our day-to-day life. For instance, when you get up in the morning and you want to buy a bottle of shampoo, the first thing that comes to your mind is, where am I going to get it? And the obvious answer is the market. So market, if I were to ask you, you would say is a place where you can buy goods and where goods are sold. But in economics, market has a special place or a special significance because it is considered to have no geographical boundaries. It's beyond geographical boundaries. What do we mean? Today we have the shopping complex. So you will ask me, Madam, a shopping complex is a market? I would say yes, because a shopping complex has a location. A shopping mall has a location. But market need not have a location. Why? Because today you must have heard of telemarketing, internet buying, sky shops. Where is the location? There is no location at all. So a market is where goods are bought and sold. There is a buyer and there is a seller. The buyer is what we are talking about today. That means we are talking in terms of what the buyer does. The buyer demands. So what does demand mean? In general, it is understood as a wish, a want, a desire. But in economics, we would say this is ineffective demand. Reason, desire, I wish for a commodity, but I cannot convert it into concrete reality. A wish is something in the mind of the individual, mind of the consumer. He wants the commodity, but he does not have the resources to convert it into reality. Therefore, we call it as ineffective demand. And in economics, we are more concerned about effective demand. What is effective demand then? It begins with desire. So all of us have number of desires, but it must be supported by the ability to buy and the willingness to buy. Now, ability to buy depends upon our earning capacity. What do we mean our earning capacity? Suppose an individual's income is 10,000 rupees and he wants a commodity of 50,000 rupees. It's just not possible because he does not have the ability to pay. Even let us assume that today we have the credit cards. Even then, he cannot have an EMI greater than 10,000 rupees. So therefore, we find that a person's desire can be converted to demand only if he has the ability to pay. Now, ability to pay is also insufficient. It must be supported by willingness to pay. Willingness to pay, that means he must be ready to part with the money that he has. If he is not ready to part, for instance, none of us have a desire for poison. We may have the ability to pay for it, but we are not going to willingly pay for it because we don't have any willingness. The willingness depends upon how intense the want is, how much of utility the commodity is going to give us. So therefore, we find that if we talk of effective demand, it must be desire supported by ability to pay, which depends on our earning capacity, willingness to pay, which depends upon the intensity of want and the utility that the commodity has. So therefore, when we talk of demand, we always relate it to price, we always relate it to a specific market in specific quantities, and we find that it differs, however, from time to time and place to place. That is why we say demand is a relative concept. The individual consumer may be the same person, but at different times he is demanding different goods as time and place and price changes. There are three types of demand. One is price demand, that is the amount of goods that a consumer demands at various prices at a given point of time. Here all other factors are assumed to be constant. Now we can also put it as the quantity that an individual consumer demands at a given price at a given point of time. Then we have the income demand. It refers to the quantities that consumer demands at different levels of income. As income changes, you will find the demands of individuals also change. Initially, the concentration is on necessities, then it shifts to comforts, then it shifts to other luxury items. So as income changes, quantity demanded of various goods change. Then we have cross demand. Cross demand refers to the demand for a commodity due to change in price of a related commodity. The related commodity may be a substitute. When we say substitute, it may be tea or coffee, or a complementary commodity where it may be petrol and car. So what we are going to buy of one commodity depends not on its price but on the price of its related commodity, which may be either a substitute or which may be a complementary commodity. Now besides these three, price, income and cross, that is, in price demand we find that price is the most important factor that is influencing the quantity demanded. In income demand we find that it is income that is influencing the quantity demanded. In cross demand we find that it is the price of the related commodity. Besides this, we also come across individual demand and market demand. Individual demand is the demand made by an individual consumer for a commodity at different prices at a given point of time. That is, here it's one consumer, one commodity, but at alternative prices what he is ready to buy. Now this is useful to the individual consumer because it helps him in preparing his budget. He is not buying only one commodity, he is buying number of commodities. So it gives him an idea how many units he can buy of a commodity at a particular price. That helps him in preparing his family budget. Whereas market demand is the demand of all the consumers in the market for that particular commodity. So here you find that we are not talking about the individual consumer, we are talking about all those people who are buying or demanding that commodity. Here we find it becomes very useful to the producer. Market demand is useful to the producer. It gives him an idea at what price, what quantities will be demanded. So it gives him an idea of the level of production that he should undertake. So you find that individual demand is useful to the individual in preparing his family budget, and for the market demand is useful to the producer because it gives him an idea of the amount or the quantity of goods that he should actually produce. Now, we find that the concept of demand, when we say the concept of demand, here we will find that basically demand is always at a price, at a time, and we find that it is in a market and it is always in specific quantities. Let us take the determinants of demand. What do we mean by determinants? Determinants are factors which influence demand. Factors which influence demand may be external or it may be internal, or we would say it is direct factors and indirect factors, or we could call it as short run factors and long run factors. So let us look at some of the direct factors. The first factor and the most important factor is always the price of the commodity. Price is the most important factor because the price indicates to the consumer the number of units he should be buying or he will be demanding, and generally the relationship between price and demand is inverse. That is, higher the price, less the demand, and vice versa. The second factor that influences demand is the price of the related commodity. Related commodity may be either a substitute or a complementary commodity. In the case of substitute, for example, tea and coffee, we find if the price of coffee rises, the demand for tea goes up. So the relationship is direct. And in the case of complementary commodities, if the price of petrol rises, the demand for car falls. The relationship is inverse. So you find how many units of a commodity is going to be demanded depends upon the price of the related commodity. The next factor that influences demand is the income of the consumer. Generally, higher the income, larger the demand. But this is in the case of normal goods. The relationship is direct. People will buy more as their income rises. But in the case of inferior goods are poor quality goods. We find that when the income rises, you find people buying less of it because now they shift to the superior commodities. That is, you find that people are going in for better and better standards of living. The next factor that we have here is taste, habits and preferences. If the change is if the consumer's taste, habits, preferences are in favor of the commodity, then he will buy more of the commodity. But if his habits, taste, preferences are not in favor of the commodity, then they will buy or they will demand less of the commodity. Besides this, we also have utility of the commodity. A commodity is demanded because it has utility. If it does not have utility, no demand. If the individual finds that the commodity has more utility, they will demand more and more of the commodity. For example, in the case of food grains, we find that there is a lot of utility for the individual consumer, so he continues to purchase. Cosmetics, or you will find in the case of detergents, we find people find utility in these commodities, but not in the case of commodities which does not provide them any utility. Then we come to the indirect factors or external factors. Among them we have the size and structure of population. Size of population indicates that larger the size, larger the demand. This is a general statement. But besides this, we also have to look at the composition of population. Composition implies what is the structure of the population, that is the age group, the sex ratio, the rural urban population, the occupational pattern. So we find that if we take up age composition, population is classified as 0 to 15, which consists of the children group, yes. 15 to 60 is the working force, 60 and above is the old people. Now here you will find that what is the composition of a country's or an economy's population? If it consists mainly of the children, then we will have to provide goods accordingly, like toys, more of those milk products, cereal food products required by the children. So that which is required by from the toddler to the 15-year-old, yes, is what we will be providing. If the age group is more in the case of 15 to 60, we will be providing more of techno-savvy goods, mobiles, iPods, laptops, yes. So all those techno-savvy goods are what we are going to produce. And if the composition we find more is in the case of 60 and above, then walking sticks and medicines and spectacles which are required by the older group of people. So demand also indicates from which group it is coming, where the demand is larger. Accordingly, you will find the structure indicates what kind of demand will be there in the market. The next that we have is the distribution of income and wealth. If income and wealth are equally distributed, then people move from necessities to comforts to luxury, the natural pattern. But if we find that wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, then you find that demand for luxuries are more, yes. So therefore it depends upon not only the income, but how income and wealth are actually distributed in the economy. Then we come to the future trends in prices, what the consumer actually expects the price to be in future. If he expects the price to rise in future, then it affects his current demand. He is going to buy more now, he is going to be more liberal now, he is going to spend more even though the current price may be higher, he is going to spend more. This is because he feels that he is taking advantage or he is getting benefit because he will not have to pay a higher price at a later date. And conversely, if he finds that the price or if he feels that the prices are going to fall, then he will buy less currently because he wants to take advantage of the future fall in price. Then we come to the tax policy of the government. If the taxes are higher, then you will find that the prices of the products will be more and therefore demand automatically is less, it decreases. So what the government policy is, whether it is levying a tax or whether it is offering subsidies, will influence the quantity demanded of the commodity. Because a tax immediately brings about a change in the MRP, and that tells the consumer whether he can afford to buy more or whether he should restrict his buying and postpone it to a later date. The last that we have is the advertisement. Advertisements can be informative, that means just making the consumer aware, or it can be persuasive, that is making him buy what the advertisement wants to sell or what the advertiser wants to sell, and shift from the commodity he is actually buying. Now, besides this, in advertisement we also have what is the bandwagon effect and the snob effect. The bandwagon effect is, my friend has it, so I must have it. Yes, my neighbors have it, so I must have it. And the snob effect is that my neighbor has it, so I should not have it. Yes? So therefore you find that demand is influenced by a number of factors, and all these factors change the quantity demanded at some time or the other. So today we have understood the concept of demand, where we find that demand is a relative term related to time, person, place, price. We also considered that if we talk of effective demand, then it must have the three concepts of desire, supported by the ability to pay, the willingness to pay. And the various types of demand, that is price demand, income demand, the cross demand, individual demand, market demand, and the various determinants, that is the direct factors and the indirect factors that influence the quantity demanded.
ये जो लेक्चर्स होते हैं यहाँ पर वो बहुत ही हाईली क्वालिफाइड जो असातिज़ा होते हैं, रिसोर्स पर्सन होते हैं, वो तैयार करते हैं। और वो सिर्फ किसी शायर के बारे में उसकी सवाने कराइफ नहीं तैयार करते, बल्कि उसकी शायरी की जो खसूसियात हैं या उसका जो पूरा लिटरेरी कंट्रीब्यूशन है। एक कहना चाहिए कि अगर मैं उर्दू के हवाले से बात करूं कि उर्दू ज़बान व अदब में उनकी जो एक कंट्रीब्यूशन है उसको वो देखते हैं और उस तमाम चीज़ों को, तमाम जिहाद को वो कवर करते हुए वो अपना लेक्चर बनाते हैं। तो ऐसे तलबा के लिए जो दूर दराज इलाक़ों में रह रहे हैं और असातिज़ा की क़िल्लत की वजह से क्लासेस नहीं हो रही हैं, उनके लिए ये बहुत ही वीडियोस बहुत ही मुआविन है, बहुत मददगार है। दूसरी तरफ मैं समझता हूँ कि जो मुकाबला जाती इम्तिहानात हैं, जैसे कि यूपीएससी में उर्दू का पेपर है, शायरी का या नस्र का पेपर है, इन वीडियोज़ की मदद से उन पेपरों को भी तैयार करने में बड़ी मदद मिलती है। दूसरे तरफ नेट का जो एग्ज़ाम होता है, जो कि लेक्चरशिप के लिए बहुत ही अहम एग्ज़ाम होता है, यानी कहना चाहिए कि बुनियाद होती है, उसके बगैर आप नेट का असिस्टेंट प्रोफेसर नहीं बन सकते, लेक्चर्स नहीं बन सकते। तो उन लेक्चरों की मदद से आप अपनी तैयारी यूजीसी की भी कर सकते हैं। स्कूल के एग्ज़ाम में भी आप देखें कि दिल्ली में ख़ास तौर से सीटेट है या अलग अलग स्टेट में अलग अलग जो टीचिंग एलिजिबिलिटी टेस्ट होते हैं, उसमें भी उर्दू के पेपर होते हैं। वहाँ भी तमाम तरह की ये जो बारीकियां हैं या जो तफसीलात हैं इसमें जो लेक्चर्स में आती हैं, वो उनके लिए मुआविन है। तो मैं समझता हूँ कि ये एक बहुत ही अहम मीडियम है, बहुत अहम ज़रिया है, जहाँ से तलबा अपने काम की चीज़ें ले सकते हैं और उनसे फ़ायदा हासिल कर सकते हैं।
the best part about this initiative is that it has made a global class into being. So in this global class, the students can log in at any part of the day or time and make use of the storehouse of knowledge. And this limit of the subjects is endless, ranging from history to political science to sociology to yoga to music and what not. And what I want to say is that this is not only helping the students but also the teachers, because they can also listen to these lectures and improve their own teaching style and also judge as to what all topics can be covered. Then also these days various new courses are being introduced in various universities, and it is not possible to have ready-made textbooks for these courses. So through these lectures, the students can be provided very valuable resource material, and that too at any part of the day or time when they want to access it. So truly this is an example of how a global class has come into being, and how not only the students but in the entire audience, it can be even a housewife, it can be even an upcoming youngster who wants to improve his knowledge, it can also be a professional who wants to gain more access to knowledge.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Defense PR. In the last episode, we have Dr. Sudhir Sukhija, who spoke to us about various aspects of Defense PR. In our second episode, we will touch on more interesting aspects. Welcome to the show, Dr. Sukhija.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Let's start talking about how does the military view the media on reporting on military matters?
Well, over a period of time, the military feels that the media does not understand the various intricacies of national security. It also feels that perhaps there is a need for better interaction with the media, so that the viewpoint of the Ministry of Defence or the three services is possibly projected in more meaningful manner, a more effective manner, safeguarding the national security though.
Probably also media organizations and journalists also need to work on a little bit of more research, understanding the situation on the ground.
Oh, definitely yes, that need is there, especially so because unlike many other subjects, the intricacies of the military are not so much well known. They are not taught, say, at the school level, the college level. Therefore, reading of books, surfing the net, speaking to people who are knowledgeable about matters military forms the basis of such knowledge.
Yeah. What would you think are the challenges that a defense correspondent faces?
Well, acquiring that wide base of knowledge of matters military takes a long time. I am not just speaking of the basics, the ranks, the structures, etc. that though essential is much more simpler, but the various intricacies of doctrines, for example, which any nation follows, is slightly an intricate sort of a study and requires time to understand. So that's one part of the challenge. The second part of the challenge is to develop trust with the people whom they interact with. More often than not, they are officers from the services or senior officers from the information service. While these officers have been brought up in a system of being secretive, it's essential that a correspondent is able to take out from them information which makes a good story. So that building of trust also takes time. It definitely involves keeping in constant touch with these people, these officers, officials, and also carrying some stories which may not really be of very saleable variety, so that that little give and take which is required is established, and then of course carrying it forward from there.
And they can keep that contacts for a lifetime if they are good at building relationships.
Yes, of course, as they say, you meet a person for a reason, a season or a lifetime. If they are able to do this beyond a reason to at least a season, if not a lifetime, would be a wonderful thing.
Dr. Sakhuja, what about the physical challenges? You know, like for example, a correspondent who goes to Siachen.
Very interesting question there. I'll tell you an anecdote. The piece to camera is an essential part of the television reporting. Those 15 to 20 seconds of fame that the correspondent gets. When you go to Siachen, you land up at the base, Siachen base, and from there the smaller helicopters, very limited capacity, take one or two correspondents to the higher posts over there. Due to technical requirements, the helicopter's rotors cannot be put off. So you land at a post, the noise created by the rotors is there, the wind chill effect, that is very cold, the breeze is also there. So you land there, the correspondent is shown, okay, this is the Indian side, this is the Pakistani side. So he takes a little time to orientate himself. He is physically in that state of extreme temperature, and then he has got to do his piece to camera. He loves to have something, good behind him, a helicopter, a Jawan or the Pakistani side, and he has got to do all this within a couple of minutes. So that is a great challenge. Therefore, this guy has got to be a person who can think while on his feet. He should be able to relate the particular event happening there and then give out. So that requires great communication skills. Of course, the knowledge base is always something which cannot be separated. And also he should be able to very quickly understand the situation and relate to it. So these are the qualities which are there. It's important that he is mentally and physically robust. That I feel is the essence there.
What are the lessons that we could learn from the Kargil conflict, the coverage of the Kargil conflict?
If you recall, for the first 2 weeks or so, when the conflict was first detected and reported, for the first few weeks, no correspondents were permitted in that region. Some of them, the more enterprising ones, sneaked through those. And during this period, some stories emerged, some were right, some were fiction, or at least part of them was fiction. But later, when this entire process was streamlined, including the daily briefings in Delhi, it became a more meaningful exercise. At that time, if you recall, the entire war came, so to say, to your sitting room, thanks mainly to the television. It was during this period that, thanks to the entire media, television, print and the others, that the nation's effort became synchronized, and the smaller differences that which are usually there, they were not there at that particular time. And thanks to media, it paid off very well, and the national effort got synergized, so to say.
Yeah. What would you say are the real challenges of defense PR?
There are many challenges of a defense PR. The first thing is, how do we maintain security?
Yeah.
The media always wants news. The more saucier, the better. Then these stories which are called exclusives, you always want to see that the story that is going out does not have security implications. This is a difficult task, because if you go by the rule book, almost everything is secret.
Yeah.
So, what do you speak and what do you not speak? The second aspect which is generally discussed is off the record. I must say there is nothing off the record with a journalist. You either tell him or don't tell him. If you don't tell him, fiction gets published or telecast.
True.
If you tell him, you are in a catch-22 situation.
Yeah.
So, that is a great challenge. Also then, you got to be extremely timely with the technological developments that we have. Today, news is telecast or broadcast or comes in the paper within a few hours of its happening. It was not so earlier. If you recall, when Edmund Hillary went up the Everest, there is a huge cash prize which was announced for the first picture, and the first picture came after many days. But when his son replicated the same thing, the pictures came in a few minutes. So, technological developments are there. The armed forces, as opposed to this, have a system of channels. So, every event, every news goes through its channels. This does not keep pace with the needs of the modern day media.
Okay. If the media reports a defense scandal, does it affect the morale of the defense forces?
Oh yeah, it affects both ways, sometimes negatively, sometimes positively. Let me explain.
Yeah.
Let us say the officers of the army, air force or navy are involved in quote unquote a scandal. It could be of various type, morals, money,
Yeah.
the 3 Ws, wine, woman, etc., wealth. That time the soldier does think, how can my bosses whom I trust, I obey without questioning, how are they involved? That does affect the morale.
Yeah.
To an extent only, because he also looks up to his immediate bosses which are at the battalion level or equivalent level. The morale is generally preserved at that level.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, many times they are very happy, the morale goes up in case such scandals, such issues are raised, which ultimately lead to improvements in the system. They may bring down the morale temporarily for a very short time, but otherwise they are happy, saying that, look, this will lead to a better army or armed forces.
What do you think of embedded journalism? Do you think it's something that can work in India?
Embedded journalism, as we are aware, the other word which has come in is in-bed journalism, and the journalists do not like that word at all. It has worked very well for the NATO forces, we are all aware of it, especially for the Americans and the Britishers.
Yeah.
But after this embedding was over, the war was over, a lot of introspection has been done, especially by the journalists in US, whether it's ethically correct. It worked for them. But as I mentioned, this debate has happened. In the Indian context, it has not been tried out in the way we speak about, say, for the NATO forces. Whether it will work or not will depend on the political and military situation at that time. It will depend whether we have long wars, which area the war is being fought. The correspondent will always want to know what is there in it that is embedding, what is there in it for me, how does it benefit me. Will I be seen as somebody speaking for the military and hence losing my independence
and credibility?
And of course, definitely yes, sir. Very importantly, his credibility. Where is credibility? Because wars may get over, but his profession is going to continue. But as I mentioned, it will be depending on these issues. It will not work definitely in internal conflicts where movement is easy, where you can get a lodging, a boarding without the support of the military. You do not require any transport, you do not require any communication support to file your stories. So, it will definitely not work there, but yes, it could be tried out if and when we have the next major conflict.
What about vernacular journalists? How do they get into defense reporting and how do you deal with them?
I will tell you out of my own experience. I will tell you a few stories as to how it really functions. In Delhi, we have small bureaus of various language media. They could be of the television, they could be of the print media. While they are interested in the national stories, but they are more interested in the political stories which are happening, which affect their respective states. They come into the picture more so when some person, a soldier, an airman or an officer, etc., who belongs to their state is involved. For example, the Bengal based vernacular, or should I say language media, they had a sort of a big story happening when there is a particular act of beating up of the police persons there by certain army men. It was a big story. They tried out in Calcutta that somebody would speak to them. It did not happen. So, they came over to us and we had to shoot. Let me tell you, the entire day when I got back home, there were calls, and then I shot, gave out the army's perspective to them in a small park which was opposite my own home. So, that is one part of it. I will give you another instance. We have a martyr, let us say, from Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka or any other state. Now, they are interested to know as to what happened, because this is a story which touches their heart.
And a powerful human interest story.
Absolutely, a very powerful human interest story. That story is very important to say somebody in Udupi, somebody in Mangalore.
That's right.
Somebody in a remote this thing, they get it from Delhi. But this would be, just mentioning these two incidents would not be the complete answer to your question. We are all aware the year on year growth of the language papers, language television channels is really very high. They are mushrooming, so to say, and collectively their reach is much more than say English or Hindi media. Our nation is in various states, they speak the local language. So, they are extremely important. English and Hindi media is important for the opinion makers, but for the masses it is a language media which needs to be focused.
You've underlined the importance of both conflict journalism and defense journalism. Don't you think that our education system should introduce this at both the undergraduate and the postgraduate level?
There is no denying the fact
Yeah.
that this is very, very essential. I would say that some aspects of the how the militaries function, the very basics, could be at the school level. But answering specifically your question of the college level, it is required, especially for those who want to pursue journalism as their career. Unless you know the basics, how do you progress to be a defense correspondent? Conflict reporting is a step even more specialized, much more specialized. Both are required, and with experience, basic learning and the experience will pay them good. I would like to make a point over here. It is my personal experience that we have very few defense correspondents who are knowledgeable about matters military. We are the second largest army, and just a handful, trust me, just a handful of people who understand the military. The scope is vast if one is passionate about it, and that is the underlying this thing. And of course, I would like to say that they say Steve Jobs, I will quote him, when he was addressing Stanford students, he spoke of the stories of his life, and towards the end he said, stay hungry, stay foolish, stay hungry for knowledge, and keep telling yourself, look, I am foolish. Foolish in the sense that I do not know it all. That is very important in all professions and also in defense.
One has to be a student all through life,
Surely.
especially in journalism.
I personally feel it is a pleasure to be a student all through one's life.
Every day you open the newspaper or the magazine or you switch on the television, you realize how ignorant you are, because there is so much to understand and learn.
Yes, of course. I would also add there, it is important to have a childlike curiosity, and that is a process of learning.
What do you think is the role of photojournalism in sending the message to the masses as far as defense PR goes?
There are so many pictures of conflict that we have seen, especially one of that little child in Vietnam, a girl who was wearing no clothes, napalm attack, running after that. That sent such a message back home to the US that it turned the tide of the war, the decisions taken for that war. A picture, as they say, speaks 100 words or 1,000 words. A video speaks 1,000,000 words. A good picture with a sensible caption does the trick. You do not require a story after that. It touches people's sentiments, and that is the bottom line of good journalism.
What are the precautions that a defense correspondent should take?
Well, by the very nature, any correspondent is very inquisitive. He wants to have something exclusive. But when functioning with the defense forces, especially in conflicts, certain precautions need to be taken. I would say that the general guidelines which have been laid down for the journalists should be followed. Let me explain this. In battle zones, certain areas may be mined, that is, anti-personnel mines, anti-tank mines, etc. are there. So, he has got to be extremely careful where he is moving on the ground. Due to reasons of security, certain lines are drawn that you do not go ahead of this. This primarily because if you go ahead of that particular line, you could draw enemy's fire. So, the physical security part will get compromised. So, he has got to be careful on that. Suppose his conflict, suppose is covering conflict internally, there is say an encounter happening between the military and the terrorist. So, the correspondent who is covering it, it is essential that he wears a bulletproof jacket and something to cover his head. It is called a patka. So, he covers his head and has a good bulletproof jacket also. Very often they are advised to write press on this, so that the militants or the terrorists do not mistake them to be somebody from the military. The very basic thing, of course, is suppose they are going to difficult areas, they should ensure that they are in good health. Anybody say with a heart problem or with a blood pressure issue going to those areas, because the medical facilities there may not be as advanced as in a big town. They have those basic facilities, but they should be very careful in that too. Also important is that use of their cameras etc., which give out flashes etc. at night. If they use them at night, it gives away the position to the opposing forces, and they could lead to very serious consequences. Also, it is in very good form to recheck whether that report which they are filing will give away certain positions etc. of our own forces, which may be a security lapse. So, these precautions could be taken by a journalist.
What about food? They could carry chocolates and dry fruits?
Yes. What I would say that as it happened in Kargil, there was one hotel, just one hotel in the entire town of Kargil, and everybody was piling on to that. So, in such situations, some ready to cook foods like say noodles, I won't name the brand, which could be cooked in a jiffy, some chocolates, some dry fruits should form a part of your backpack. And it would not be wise to bank on the local forces there, because they will be more engaged in war rather than feeding anybody beyond their own people.
Sir, we have discussed quite a lot today, but is there anything that you would like to talk about which we have not covered?
Well, I would say that this particular field of defense correspondence or conflict reporting is one field in which we do not have many people today. You have so many people reporting on different beats. In this we do not have. There is an actual dearth of good defense correspondents. I feel that the younger generation who are passionate about their nation, of seeing the country, seeing the world and braving it also to say, need to join this profession. It is a tough job. It is a really tough job. But if Kargil is something that we have got to learn from, many of those in the media today came up during that period. They are household names today. I am not wishing that we have one more conflict, but definitely this is a field which is extremely satisfying.
But conflict would be there all the time.
Oh, of course, that is the only thing which has remained from times of Mahabharata to now. Conflict will always remain, and if conflict always remains, they have a job which will always be there. So, it is a very secure job. There will be conflicts. Since there will be conflicts, there will be a job, and an enjoyable job, a job in which you will say, oh, today is a new day, everything keeps changing.
Thank you, Dr. Sakhuja. We have had a very interesting interview today, and we have covered a huge area in defense PR. I am sure you have inspired a lot of students to take up conflict reporting and defense journalism.
Certainly, there are a number of students, young men and women there who are very passionate about what they do, and if I helped in any small measure, indeed it is my honor and pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back with another episode which deals with other interesting aspects. But on behalf of all of you, I thank Dr. Sakuja for taking out time to talk to us. Thank you and goodbye.
Hello and welcome to today's episode on blogging. I am Sunil Saxena. I am an author and journalist with over 3 decades of experience in print, new media, social media, media education, and media research. I am an avid blogger, and in this episode, I'll share many of the insights into blogging. This includes the do's and don'ts of blogging and some carefully researched tips to become a successful blogger. The episode also describes what is a blog, the important features of a blog, and how blogging is being used by individuals and organizations. The term blog is not very old. In fact, it was coined as recently as 1999. The credit for coining this term, according to Webopedia.com, goes to Peter Marholz. In April 1999, Peter came across a web term called weblog, which had been coined by John Barger. Peter shortened the term weblog to blog. The rest, as they say, is history. Hundreds of thousands of people across the world have since then been using the word blog for their writings on the web. In fact, so popular is this form of writing that an entire ecosystem has grown around blogs, which is popularly referred to as blogosphere. This virtual world is populated by techies, professionals, housewives, environmentalists, scientists, teenagers, celebrities, religious groups, politicians, bureaucrats, and many, many more. Most of them are prolific writers and churn out millions and millions of words every day. In its simplest form, a blog can be defined as a personal diary on the net, which is used by individuals to write on subjects that they know. Some individuals write every day, some write twice or thrice a week, some write once a week. Some are very irregular and write only when they have to say something. What makes blogs unique is that they give an opportunity to every individual to publish their thoughts. This was not possible earlier. An individual could send his writings for publication to a newspaper or a magazine or to a book publisher, but he had no say in the actual publication of his work. That was decided by the editors who reviewed the work and decided whether the work was worthy of publication or not. Blogs have changed the way information is communicated. It is no longer from one to many. On the contrary, it is from many to many. Blogs are not only used by individuals to post comments, but are also used by companies and institutions as an important public relations tool. Companies like Google, LinkedIn, Facebook encourage their employees to write blogs to communicate new offerings or research being done to improve existing products. These blogs are informal in tone and are carefully monitored by technology writers and media. For companies, they are proving to be a highly effective tool to communicate information. Similarly, celebrities like Amitabh Bachchan and Amir Khan write blogs that film writers watch closely because they provide useful information. They have become a smart way to communicate with fans and the media. However, it must be remembered that it is not easy to sustain a blog. The blogger must come up with fresh and original information that others want to read. One reason for the huge popularity of blogs is the ease with which they can be created. There are no special skills required to create a blog. Also, there is no cost involved in setting up a blog. There are several blog providers on the net, but the most popular are WordPress.com and Blogger.com. These two blog providers are internet giants in their own rights. They have made it possible for millions of individuals to create blogs for free. You too can use them to set up your own blog. All that you need is a valid email address. After that, you can visit either WordPress or Blogger and click on the link Create Your Blog. This will open a page where you will be asked to fill your username, the name of the blog you want to create, and a password. The blog provider will scan its database to check if the login name or email address given by you is being used by any other individual. If these are unique, a verification link will be sent to the email address given by you. Otherwise, you will be asked to provide another email address or choose another login name. This way, the blog providers ensure that you are the sole owner of your blog. Once you click on the verification link to establish your identity, the blog provider will give you access to the administrative area of your blog, which is popularly known as admin area. This entire process is fully automated, and in less than 5 minutes, you can become the proud owner of a blog. All that you need to do now is to create content and publish it on your blog for the world to read, share, and comment upon. It is that simple. You can also use Indian blog providers to create your blog. The 5 most popular Indian blog providers are Rediff.com, Sifi.com, IndiaTimes.com, Sulekha.com, and BigAdda.com. Blogging is no longer limited to English. Most blog providers like WordPress, Blogger, or Rediff provide blogging facilities in 10 or more Indian languages. You too can take advantage of this and create your blog in your own language. The following are the important features of a blog. 1. Web address. Each blog has a unique web address. This address is created by the program after an individual enters the blog name. For instance, a blogger wants the name of his blog to be My Blog. WordPress will check if this name has been allotted to any other blogger. If it has not been allotted, then it will create the following web address: http://myblog.wordpress.com. The blog can be accessed by anyone, anywhere in the world by typing this web address. 2. Web space. WordPress provides 3 GB of free space to every blogger who opens an account with it. This is enough web space to create millions of text articles and post thousands of photographs. Bloggers who want to post audio or video files have to buy space. 3. Admin area. The heart of each blog is the admin area. It is a full-fledged content management system. The blogger can post stories, modify stories, add photographs, delete stories, archive stories, create categories, assign keywords, decide look and feel of the blog, etc. The great thing about the admin area is that it is extremely user-friendly, and it does not take much time for a new blogger to understand how it works. 4. Content window. The front end of a blog has a content window. This is where the blog posts are displayed. The postings are in reverse chronological order, with the last post being displayed first. This ensures that old content is pushed lower down on the page and the latest post is displayed prominently on the top for visitors to browse. 5. Archives. The blogs provide for archiving of content. The archiving can be done on weekly, monthly, or yearly basis. It can be done on the basis of categories too. In either case, content once posted on the blog is stored in neat folders and can be retrieved with ease. 6. Comment box. Each blog post has a comment box where the visitors can leave their reactions. The blog owner can moderate these comments, even delete them if he considers them mischievous or malicious. 7. Subscriber feed. The visitors have the option to subscribe to the blog feed. This is a useful facility because subscribers get to know of every new blog post in their feed readers without visiting the blog. They can then decide to visit the blog, to read the full post, or ignore the new post. 8. Blog roll. This is another important feature of blogs. The blog owners use this feature to showcase blogs that they like. 9. Plugins or widgets. The plugins or widgets allow blog owners to pull content from other sources. For instance, a blog provider can use the weather widget to enable visitors to learn about weather conditions. Similarly, the astrology widget can showcase forecasts. These are value additions that enhance site stickiness. 10. Themes. The blog providers have developed scores of themes. These themes define the look and feel of a blog and can be installed at the click of a button. The blogger has the option to change the themes at any point of time. 11. Permalink. Each blog post, when it is published, is assigned a web address. This web address is called a permalink because it is a permanent URL of the blog post. Any blog user can retrieve the post or direct a visitor to the blog post by using the permalink. 12. Categories. The blogger can arrange or organize content in distinct folders called categories. For instance, a blogger on media can store TV articles under television category, radio articles under radio category, and newspaper articles under print category. The blogger can even create subcategories, making storage and retrieval of content easy. 13. Tags. Blogs also allow the searching of blog posts using tags or keywords. The keywords are assigned before the blog post is published. This makes it possible for visitors to locate articles of interest by inputting keywords in the search box. The keywords also make it easier for search engines to index articles. 14. Search box. Each blog is equipped with search facility. All that the blogger needs to do is to activate the search box and position it at a prominent place on the page. The visitors can then search the blog by entering keywords in the search box. It is easy to set up a blog, but very difficult to get visitors. Even if you get visitors, it is not easy to ensure that they come back. So, what do you do to become a successful blogger? You must learn to create posts that are easy to read. 4 popular blogging styles that bloggers have developed are: 1. List posts. In this style of blogging, the blogger organizes information in short and snappy points. For instance, a doctor who does hair transplant may write on 5 hair transplant techniques, 7 precautions to take when going for a hair transplant, 7 dangers of hair transplant, 11 precautions to take after hair transplant, etc. 2. Instruction posts. This style of blogging is most suited for those bloggers who wish to share or pass knowledge. For instance, a newspaper editor may want to give practical tips to students of journalism. He may explain the art of writing a headline, the process of selecting news reports, the points that must be kept in mind while cropping photographs, etc. Such posts build a loyal following over a period of time. 3. Comparison posts. Bloggers spend considerable time collecting information about products like cars, mobile phones, laptops, refrigerators, etc. They then post this information on their blogs in the form of charts, making it easy for visitors to compare prices of mobile phones, features, promotional schemes, etc. 4. Review posts. This is another popular form of blog writing. However, the success of such blogs depends upon how well the blogger knows a subject. For instance, a blogger who reviews new cars should be well informed about cars and be able to publish blog posts that are informative, objective, and technically sound. Blog headlines are much more important than newspaper or magazine headlines. This is because, unlike the print headlines, the blog headlines are written to serve 2 masters. The first master obviously is the individuals who visit the blog. They will read the blog only if they find the headline exciting enough to open the blog post. Dead headlines are unlikely to excite the curiosity of the visitors, and the chances are that the visitor may move to another blog. The second master is the search engine. The blog headline must have keywords that the search engine will index and store in its database. Ideally, these keywords should be those that are being searched. A good place to find the popular search words is Google AdWords Keywords page. This is a free service that Google provides. all that you need to do is to test the popularity of keywords that best reflect the content of your blog post. The Google tool will generate data of the searches made for the keyword and related keywords. You can then suitably tweak the blog headline. Every day, millions of words are posted on blogs. WordPress estimates that on its site, bloggers post 15 million words every day. WordPress, incidentally, is only one of the scores of blog providers that provide free blogging service. So you can imagine how many blog posts go up on the net every minute. Your blog post is like the proverbial needle in the haystack, a grain of sand on the seashore. How does a visitor find it? To be a successful blogger, you need to observe the following do's and don'ts. 1. You should blog on one subject only. Don't make the mistake of writing on everything under the sun. Your blog will lack focus and the visitors will be confused. A single subject blog invariably leads to a dedicated following. 2. Your blog should be on a subject you know. Never make the mistake of recycling content. The chances are that people would have already read that content elsewhere, and they will ignore your posting. The most valued content is that which is original. 3. Do not overreach yourself. It is better to write one good post a week than 3 average posts a day. 4. Make sure that you maintain a schedule. You may write once a day, twice or thrice a week, or even once a week. But make sure that your blog post goes up on that day, if possible at a fixed point of the day. This will give reason to visitors to land at your blog on those specific days when they expect fresh content to be available. 5. Cut out the I's from your blog. The most boring blogs are those where the bloggers tell you that I have done this, I have knowledge of this. The best blogs are those that use the conversational tone. They are written in the second person and are informal. 6. You must build a loyal following. And a good way to do this is to encourage your visitors to subscribe to your blog feed. Make sure that you position the RSS feed logo prominently. You should also put it at the end of each blog post so that it is noticed and the visitors may enter their subscription details. The RSS feed is not the only subscription tool available to you. You can also advise your visitors to subscribe to your newsletter. 7. You must provide for a user-friendly experience to your visitors. This can be achieved by using a design template which is easy on the eye and where the visitor can locate interesting content easily. You must make sure that the search box is placed prominently on your blog and there is a proper contact page which gives information about you. 8. You must not hide information about yourself. You must let the visitors know who you are by publishing an About Me page. This will give them confidence that the blog is being written by a person who knows the subject. 9. You must showcase your best posts. This decision need not be subjective, but should be based on statistics. You should use the blog admin area to find out which posts have been read the most. The headlines of these posts should then be displayed prominently so that the new visitors get to know about them. 10. You must assign keywords judiciously. Your blog posts will start figuring in search engine results if the keywords match search words. 11. You should be careful in the number of items you post on your blog. Your visitor has come to read what you have written. Don't ask him to click on ads or visit affiliate marketing links or recommend you to his friends. This may distract the visitor, and the primary purpose of bringing a visitor to your blog will be lost. There are 4 easy ways to popularize your blog. The first is to get your blog listed on blog search engines. The obvious choice is Google Blog Search. Once you do this, the Google bot starts visiting your blog and indexing its content. The other search engines where you should list your blog is Bloglines, Blogdex, and Blog Pulse. The second way to popularize your blog is to list your blog on Indian blog directories. When you do so, your blog will start getting noticed by bloggers who blog on the same subject. The popular Indian blog directories are labnol.org, indieblogger.in, and blogs.oneindia.in. The third way is to integrate your blog with social networking sites like facebook.com, twitter.com, and googlecircles.com. When you do this, your every new blog post gets simultaneously published on these social networking sites. It can then get promoted by your friends who are members of these sites or picked up by search engines who regularly spider these sites. Either way, the reach of your blog post goes up. The fourth way is to catch the attention of fellow bloggers. You can achieve this by adopting the following 6-point strategy. 1. Make a list of blogs that you like most. These blogs should be related to the subject on which you blog. 2. List these blogs on your blog roll. In case the number of these blogs is more than 10, then create a separate page called your favorite blogs and list them there. 3. Subscribe to the RSS feeds of your favorite blogs. When you do so, the bloggers who have set up these blogs will notice you. 4. Comment on as many fresh posts that your fellow bloggers publish. The comments should not be frivolous but substantial. Make sure that your comments end with your blog address. 5. Try and create posts on points mentioned in the blog posts of your fellow bloggers. These posts should be original and not a rehash of what has been posted by your fellow bloggers. They should carry the trackback URL of your fellow bloggers. This will make them aware of your postings, and a few may visit your blog to check what you have written out of interest. 6. Wait patiently for at least 6 months. After that, send an email request asking your fellow bloggers to list you on their blog roll. The chances are that quite a few of them may accept your request, especially if they find you are a worthwhile blogger. Once this happens, you will become a part of the blogging community that so far you have admired from a distance. In this episode, you learned what is a blog and how the term blog came into existence. You were explained the process of creating a blog, important features of a blog, and the points you should keep in mind while writing blog headlines. You learned the important do's and don'ts of blogging and the measures you should take to popularize your blog. We hope that this episode will help you set up your very own blog. Those who do have their own blogs can use the points given today to make their blogs even more popular. Thank you, and see you soon with another informative episode. Goodbye.
Welcome friends. All knowledge, as they say, is one. We divide it into streams and disciplines only to compensate the inadequacies of a human mind, because human mind is too weak to understand knowledge in totality. Of many innumerable branches and disciplines of knowledge, there is one that deals ostensibly with numbers, with calculations, with computations. Having said that, there is only one word that needs to be spelt out, and that word is mathematics. When we utter the word mathematics, we are pushed into a world where we see all problem solving, logic, and nothing else. But this is not the matter of the fact. The fact is that we are driven towards not the method and the mask of mathematics, but the mystique and the philosophy of mathematics on the whole. In our today's discussion, we'll be talking about mathematics, that breathtaking, fascinating subject for our students. And we have invited in our studio a celebrated mathematician, a noted academic, Professor M.A. Sophie, Professor of Mathematics from University of Kashmir. Sir, we welcome you in our studio.
Pleasure.
And as they say, it's always safe to begin at the beginning. And we begin with this simplest possible question, that where from have we got this term mathematics? What's its origin, so that our students can comprehend the nature of the subject?
Well, I always find it more difficult to talk about mathematics than mathematics itself. So talking about mathematics entails its philosophy, its raison d'etre, its relevance, and things like that. Regarding the term mathematics, it invariably deals with numbers, but the definition of mathematics has changed over the centuries, over a period of time. You see, during the Egyptian and Babylonian times, mathematics used to be dealing with numbers only. And then with the Greeks, from say 500 BC to 300 AD, the Greeks ruled the roost in mathematics, and then mathematics dealt mostly with figures, with shapes in the form of geometry which they created. And ever since, it has been changing with times, and at the moment what we know of mathematics is a science which deals with patterns of different kinds, patterns that you can witness in the number system, patterns that you encounter in various designs, in shapes, in configurations. So there is essentially a kind of agreement among the mathematicians that mathematics ought to be looked upon as a science of patterns.
So it's not exclusively about numbers and figures as we in our common day parlance assume it to be, but it deals with the patterns, the logical pattern of the things.
Absolutely.
So about the etiology of the word, that mathematics, can we split it into two, like all logis or all branches of knowledge?
I don't think so.
What does it mean?
Is it because like biology or microbiology and things like that, these are of a more recent vintage. So these words have been coined by attaching meanings to various syllables constituting that word. That doesn't quite apply to the word mathematics.
No. We say that there is applied mathematics and then there is pure mathematics. For our students, it's a must that they must know and understand the difference between the two as to what is applied and what is pure mathematics.
You see, personally, I don't look at mathematics as diversified or divided into pure and applied mathematics. Basically, it's a search for beauty, that drives a mathematician in his work on mathematics. Essentially, a search for beauty inevitably and ultimately leads to a body of mathematics that's useful in our understanding of the world around us, of the cosmos in which we see the physical phenomena unfolding. So essentially and basically, it's a search for beauty. And to that extent, the kind of mathematics that we do or we end up doing can be branded or classified as pure mathematics. But the moment someone wants to apply these methods, these techniques, these theorems, these results in diverse areas of human activity, it could be the physical world, the biological world or even the sociological world. So when he applies his mathematical techniques there to have a better understanding of things, then we say, I mean, we roughly say that he is an applied mathematician or he is doing applied mathematics. So basically it's pure mathematics all the way. You see, I can cite any number of examples where the driving force behind a mathematician has been search for beauty. You see, the Greeks really excelled in this art. Greeks did geometry for its own sake, for the sake of knowledge. And to me it's very surprising that their theory of so-called conic sections, which constitutes what's called Euclidean geometry, this turned out to be the language which was used by Copernicus centuries later in his understanding of the solar system. So it was he who proved or showed that the earth revolves around the sun in an orbit which is elliptical. So ellipse was a mathematical object or a geometrical object which was discovered and studied very extensively by the Greeks, being completely unaware of its of the possibility of its applications later. And similarly, there is something called non-Euclidean geometry, right? I can explain to you, and it's a it's a very simple statement. If in the plane of the blackboard you have a straight line and a point lying outside of it, then from this point you can draw exactly one line which is parallel to the given line. I mean, that's easy to do. You can do it. So this was taken as an axiom. You see, the Greeks, they wondered whether you could prove it by means of other postulates of Euclidean geometry. Later it was shown by several mathematicians, including one Lobachevsky, Bolia, and even Gauss from Germany, that it cannot be proved. You have to in fact accept it as an independent axiom. And that was a great idea, which resulted in the creation of what's called non-Euclidean geometry. So to this extent it was still a very pure mathematical construct, an abstract object. Lo and behold, later when Einstein created his general theory of relativity, which has revolutionized physics of the 20th century, it was this non-Euclidean geometry that was used there as a main mathematical tool.
Sir, breaking that parochial shell, the way we present mathematics to our students, it creates a kind of aversion and a kind of intimidation in a student that it's a world that's so convoluted and complicated with numbers and figures only. My question is that how can mathematics as a subject, as a discipline, be made as a part of big human endeavor? Like, let it be a part of an endeavor like dance, like music, or like literature. But normally we see that literature, mathematics and poetry are all poles apart. Do you see a meeting point, a point where all those subjects converge, where mathematics really is presented as a subject of beauty?
So the bottom line is that all knowledge is one. Whether it comes from physics, it comes from mathematics, it comes from life sciences, all knowledge is one. It only needs tremendous amounts of human ingenuity to decipher and unravel these connections. They are very much there, lurking in the shadows. You know, certain connections connecting, certain links connecting mathematics with, say, law or social sciences or international law. The links are already there, but it's a matter of time before one is able to see those links. In the realm of physics, it has already been achieved to a large extent. You see, what really surprises me is that something that was created in mathematics, say 60, 70 years ago, physicists 60 years down the line find applications of those mathematical principles in their theories of the universe. This non-Euclidean geometry is a case in point. So it was invented years ago, and then as a pure mathematical construct, as I said, and then later applied by Einstein in his theory of relativity. So such examples are innumerable.
So let's talk about the claim which logicists hold about mathematics, that this is indispensable to all empirical sciences. So how can we explain the need of having a separate and independent discipline as mathematics if it runs in the blood of every subject? That means, like language is the part, an inseparable, inseparable part of any other subject. Is mathematics the same part, or if it is, then how can it be seceded and brought forth as an independent subject?
Very much so. It is part of, it's supposed to be a part of the curricula which every student, whether of science or of arts, is supposed to know. You see, look at the stock exchange, for example. It's a very chaotic thing, which is not amenable to certain prognostications. But methods of mathematics have been used of late in our understanding of how the system works, how the market works. The point I want to make is mathematics is indispensable in every walk of life. Why are we not able to do it? Why we are not able to implement it at every level of the curricula? It has to do with what we are saying, aversion towards mathematics, both amongst the teachers as well as the students. You see, unfortunately, you need some preparations in order to understand the basic language of mathematics. You see, I, as an outsider to, say, literature or economics or any other intellectual endeavor, can understand most of the material just by reading through it. There are definitely certain subtleties involved which I may not be able to comprehend, but then in general terms I will be able to understand what is the crux of the story. But howsoever expert you are in your own subject, you need to have a solid amount of background in order for you to understand even the basics of mathematics. So you need some preparation. It is basically that unwillingness or that inability for you to have a smattering of those basics, that is the main impediment in your understanding of mathematics. At the school level, I would say the main reason responsible for an aversion towards the subject is the presence of teachers who are simply uninspiring. They are not able to, in fact, they don't have the passion for studying the subject, much less radiate that enthusiasm.
Do you mean to say, sir, that what we lack is the proper presentation of the subject of mathematics?
As I said, charity begins at home. Unless you are thoroughly convinced about what you are doing, you are not going to carry conviction to your pupils, to your students. I mean, you have to be really excited about it. Mathematics is perhaps, it stands apart from other disciplines. You have to be involved in it right, left and center. You have to be deeply involved in it. You have to be very passionate about it. And once the teacher has it, there is no reason why he can't radiate this enthusiasm to the students.
In the students also.
The tragedy is that such teachers are there, very few and far between.
Hope we get such teachers also in the future. Sir, in your earlier, you made a reference in your discussion about geometry. Talking about the traditional philosophy of East and the West, we'll talk about the Greek concept of mathematics, where they would say that 1 is not a number, it's a measuring unit, or 2 is the fundamental notion of a pair, but not a number. So, sir, can we conclude that geometry has preceded mathematics, and in fact geometry provides the base, the fundamental platform for mathematicians to go ahead?
Well, geometry is a very important area in mathematics. It's a very vital subject. It in fact constitutes what's called a core area of mathematics. Greeks had a tendency to geometrize things, but that didn't mean that number as such could not be understood or could not be conceived without reference to its geometrical connotations.
So they would take numbers according to the distance from the center, like a number line. In between there is 0 and minus and plus. You measure numbers according to the distance from the center. So that was geometrizing.
Yeah, I mean, yes. As I said, all mathematics is one. So they were able to look at numbers from a geometrical point of view. And conversely, and contemporaneously, we understand geometry in terms of numbers.
So going back to Greek philosophy, that Plato was more concerned about ontology and Aristotle more concerned about logic. Going by that very philosophy, we come across this example that mathematics exists beyond physical realities. If mathematical entities are something that can be separable from physical world, how can we approach them, or where do they exist? Is it a kind of ether? What is the medium of those mathematical entities in which they exist, and how can they be approached?
You see, you have to understand that mathematics is basically the creation of the human mind. It exists up there in the mind, in the head of a mathematician. So it's not something that you can feel with the touch of your hand, or it's not at all a physical quantity. So there's a world, it has a world of its own, which you can feel as a mathematician, but
is it purely abstract?
At a particular level, yes. But then it also reflects, mimics something that you see in your everyday life. The point I want to make is some problems in abstract mathematics which deals with abstract objects, have been motivated by certain considerations in physics. Some developments have taken place in physics of the real world, something as concrete as our
yes, of course, the
material way, as our yes. But then people did come across some problems at the physical level, and they provided a lot of grist to the mill of a mathematician. So some problems, some deep, profound problems in mathematics have been inspired by phenomena that we witness in physics, and conversely.
So why is it so that people who have been so engrossed and obsessed with poetry and art and literature, generally speaking, there can be exceptions of course, but mathematics has always been their undoing? Can the reason be same, as you have already spelt out, that there is not a proper presentation of mathematics as a beautiful subject, but what we make of it is just a drab listing of numbers and figures?
You see, unlike literature and poetry, as I said, except in very exceptional cases, you need a lot of training in mathematics. You see, mathematics cannot be expected, cannot be hoped to be understood, much less mastered, without proper training and upbringing. In the case of literature, it could all be, you need some inspiration in literature as well. You need some guidance. But you can be a man of literature, you can write good poetry on your own, except in very exceptional cases, as I said. That cannot happen in mathematics. And when I said exceptional cases, what I have in mind is the examples like that of Srinivasam Ramanujam. He was uninitiated in the formal sense of the term in mathematics. So was the case with Euler, the famous Leonhard Euler, one of the greatest mathematicians.
Or John Nash, the man who made a mark in the 20th century.
Absolutely.
So talking about the same, that a beautiful mind like John Nash was presented so beautifully in front of the world that mathematics at once became a subject that could captivate the whole world. Can we set another example of the same, that presenting it in such a graceful way that we would like to opt to mathematics as a complete discipline, a complete stream of subject for our lifetime assignments?
The first thing about mathematics is that you cannot talk about your enthusiasm for mathematics, the kind of results that you are discovering as a mathematician. You cannot communicate it to the first person on the street. You cannot even communicate it to an educated layman, someone who has excelled in his subject as a doctor or as an engineer or as a physicist or as a chemist. It's very difficult to tell him what exactly you are doing. But then this was the story of story that persisted, say, till the 30s or 40s. The great Hilbert, it's a great name in the world of mathematics, who influenced mathematics like no one else. He would say that one has not mastered a piece of mathematics unless he is able to explain his mathematics to the first person on the street. So that's a very tall order, that's a big ask. It's not really easy to do it. But I think there is a trend these days, there is a campaign going on that mathematicians cannot expect to be left to themselves, they cannot hope to be left to themselves. They need to transfer this enthusiasm to others and communicate their mathematics to others so that people understand what they really are doing.
Now, do you mean to intellectualize or to socialize mathematics as a subject so that it can be the subject of interest for one and all, not for only those specialized few who have got some degrees in the subject?
As I said, that's a very tall order. I mean, it's not to me. It's not easy to explain mathematics to everybody, but everyone in the modern world has to have a smattering of a reasonably good deal of mathematics. I mean, there's the kind of mathematics that's taught at the BSc level, up to the BSc level. So this kind of mathematics is the bottom line, which everybody, wherever he wants to initiate himself into, everybody is supposed to know that kind of mathematics. You see, research mathematics is to be distinguished from the kind of mathematics that is a must. That's a must for everybody.
Sir, thank you very much. We discussed many important things about the subject, and many more important things are to be discussed, but they will be done in the second part of our program. As of now, I thank you very much for being with us. So Professor M.A. Sophie, explaining the beauty, the grace of a subject called mathematics, which is not all about numbers and figures, but which is, in fact, the queen of all subjects for the fascination it carries for those who love it and know it. With these words, we take your leave, and we'll be back with the next program with Professor M.A. Sophie. Till then, thank you very much.
I'm Parag Agrawal from Mumbai. I won a gold medal at the International Physics Olympiad held in Antalya, Turkey this year. I'm a student of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Bombay. I did my schooling from Atomic Energy Central School. My father is a scientific officer in Bhabha Atomic Research Center, and my mother is a lecturer in Victoria Jubilee Technical Institute. Well, actually a few years ago, the Maths Olympiad was held in India, maybe 96. So it was, the students were put up very close to my house in our colony. So I saw them going around, I met a couple of them then. And that's when I thought, okay, if I could do something like this, it would be so great. Moreover, later when I was in 11th, I met a few of the people who had been representing India at the Olympiads. One of them had represented twice actually. And he told me, yeah, it's very great, just you have to work hard and you can do anything possible. And he guided me about the preparation and generally was very helpful about it. In 10th standard itself, I got interested in physics. So I used to study physics offhand, not only the school curriculum, but also due to my interest, I used to study physics. Moreover, I was preparing for JEE during my 11th and 12th. And the preparation of the Olympiad and JEE go hand in hand. So that's basically how I prepared for the Olympiad. And once we were selected to the national phase, that is when we got through the Indian National Physics Olympiad, then we had a rigorous training camp for about 3 weeks. And then that's when we got all the practical exposure that was required for the International Olympiad. On the way to the Olympiad, actually I was very nervous about how I would do and how difficult it would be, how the competition would be. But as soon as we reached there, the environment was great. Everyone was relaxed, having a lot of fun. It was more like a holiday season. Everyone was enjoying. And that relieved my tension. That basically helped me relax. And then the paper was very, very easy compared to the training we had here. I'm only in my first year of engineering as of now. So I have not specifically decided, or actually I cannot decide what my future would be like. But I know whatever I do, I'll enjoy because that's what I'm like. And right now I'm enjoying computer science and engineering, and I think research in computer science and engineering is what my future would be.
Welcome to the lecture series in Organic Chemistry 1, Unit 2, which is concerning the organic reaction mechanism. This is the fourth episode in continuation to the previous ones, wherein we talked about the basic concepts, also the types of reactions in organic chemistry and organic reactions. Today we shall talk about the energy considerations in reaction mechanism. It is planned to talk in general about what exactly do we mean by the energy considerations, an introduction to that, and then we shall talk about the two important considerations. One is the thermodynamics and another is the kinetics. Then we would talk about the representation of these two considerations in the form of potential energy diagrams, which are very important when we discuss the reaction mechanism. All of us know that energy is really important for any reaction to move forward, and in most of the reactions there is a full possibility of formation of two or more products, and of course sometimes a single product is formed. So we can say that many chemical reactions have the ability to generate more than one product, and the relative amounts of products formed in such reactions depend on the conditions under which the reaction is performed. It is not only the reaction condition which is important, but also there are a number of other factors like the nature of the substrate, the solvents which we use, the reagents about which we've discussed in the previous episodes also. How do they actually monitor a reaction and what do they tell us about the reaction mechanism? But how do we actually ascertain the likely product, and what conditions do we alter to get the desired product are the larger questions for the energy considerations. So it will be very pertinent to put forth what are we looking for when we consider the energy considerations. Well, the first question is, will the reaction take place or not, which is very obvious. We are never sure, and especially for organic compounds which are generally not very reactive, there is always a probability of doubt of the formation of the product. And if the product is formed, then how much is the product formed also is very crucial, because most of the times we are looking for good yields. How fast would the product be formed? It is always not necessary that if we have got a compound in good amounts, that is the sufficient condition for a reaction. It is also important that the time which is spent for the reaction should also not be too much. The fastness of the reaction is also very important, especially for two reactions which are competing between themselves. And how would reactants get converted into the products? So far in the previous episodes and also this one, we've been talking about the reaction mechanism. This is what is the domain of reaction mechanism, which tells us that what is the process, what are the steps which are involved while a reaction takes its course from the reactants to the products. And also finally then, how does the rate depend on reaction conditions? In fact, we can rationalize all these important questions in the form of two important energy considerations. The first two questions relate to the feasibility, that is, whether a reaction is proceeding or not, and if yes, then to what extent. So these two things form the thermodynamics of any organic reaction. Also, how fast the reaction is moving and what is the mechanism, how are the reactants getting converted into products, and therefore how and what are the factors which are affecting the rate come under the domain of the kinetics, which generally measures the fastness of reaction. It is in terms of these two considerations we will look into the organic reaction mechanism. So what are the underlying principles? We come to after talking about this is the relative thermodynamic stability of the products, the rate and the factors affecting them, and then the mechanism of product formation on the basis of these two principles. Moving on to the thermodynamic considerations, and be assured that in your physical chemistry courses you must have studied enough of thermodynamics, and the crux of the thermodynamics lies generally when we talk about the free energy change. Even for organic reactions, the principles lie the same. The thermodynamic principles are the same. It's just that we apply these principles to the organic reactions also. So for any reaction to move forward, we know that the free energy change, that is the delta G value, is the one which ascertains the reaction, and for a reaction to proceed spontaneously, it should have a negative value. And how do we actually define delta G? In the form of this equation, that is delta G is equal to delta H minus T delta S, and this is valid under a constant temperature. So the factor temperature becomes immaterial when we are trying to rationalize this equation, and this is the equation in fact which becomes the deciding factor whether the reaction will move forward or not. Maybe you are aware of these two terms also. Delta H is the change in enthalpy and delta S is the change in entropy. And enthalpy is a state function, and you cannot measure enthalpy of a reactant or a product separately, but we can measure the change in enthalpy. Therefore, we represent delta H by the enthalpy of products minus the enthalpy of reactants. This is the heat absorbed or released at constant pressure to define it, and similar to the change in enthalpy is the change in entropy, which is again a state function. That is, you cannot measure the entropy of the reactant or the product, but the change in entropy can be measured, and generally it is defined as a change in energy dispersal or disorderliness. For a reaction to move forward or for the feasibility of the reaction, the thermodynamics states that entropy should have a positive value. That is, any randomness or disorderliness will give rise to a feasible reaction, and delta H should be negative. So we need to really rationalize the equation delta G is equal to delta H minus T delta S a little more. If delta G has to be negative, which we said for the spontaneity of the reaction, for the reaction to move automatically or move forward, delta G should be negative, and for delta G to be negative, we should have a value of delta H negative and value of delta S positive. So this will be the condition which will be the most desired in most of the reactions. But what may happen if delta S is negative? That is, instead of disorderliness, we are getting orderliness in products and less randomness. We can say that if delta S is negative, but delta H is negative enough to overpower this term, still the reaction will be feasible. The reaction will move in the forward direction. Okay, the other condition could be that we may have a delta S positive but delta H positive. What will happen in this case? In such cases also the reaction may move forward, but then delta S should be highly positive, so that again this term will have a negative value much more than the positive value of delta H. So when delta G is negative, there could be two possibilities. One is that delta H is highly negative, and we call such reactions as exothermic reactions, where the energy would be released, and delta S could be positive or negative also. But because delta H is highly negative, the reaction gets driven to the forward direction, and we call such reactions as enthalpy driven. Enthalpy driven because enthalpy change becomes the driving force in taking the reaction to the forward direction. Well, the other possibility is that delta H is positive, that is in the case of endothermic reactions which proceed by absorption of energy, and delta S may be highly positive, that the products show a lot of randomness. This type of reaction is driven by entropy. Entropy becomes the most driving force, the best driving force in such reactions. For the reaction to go completion, we call such reactions as entropy driven. We take an example. When one pentene cleaves into ethene and propene, the process is endothermic. This is an experimental fact which has been established by doing this experiment. One pentene is splitting into two alkenes, and this reaction is endothermic because we can see that there is a lot of energy is absorbed. The entropy of the reaction is increasing, the disorderliness or the randomness, because of existence of two molecules instead of one. So this reaction, in spite of its being endothermic, gets driven in the forward direction. It becomes feasible. What happens in an opposite case? That is when two of the molecules combine to give one molecule. For a reaction of ethylene with hydrochloric acid to give chloroethane, the reaction is exothermic. Again, of course, established by experiments, this reaction is exothermic, yet the decrease in entropy makes the conditions unfavorable. The reaction is exothermic, that means we have delta H negative. But what are we observing? That the two molecules which had more randomness, more disorderliness, get converted into one molecule. That means there is more orderliness or less randomness. The reaction, in spite of being exothermic, becomes unfavorable to proceed in the forward direction. But there is a point to make, that it is not always that the thermodynamic considerations alone decide whether a reaction is feasible or not. They are important, but there is something else which comes into picture besides this. So thermodynamic features of chemical reactions do not themselves tell anything about their rates. We are not sure. They may be telling about the feasibility and the extent, but nothing about the speed of the reaction. So during the combined process of bond making and bond breaking, you would recall from your previous episodes that we talked about heterolysis, homolysis, and the happening of the reactions by ways of bond making and bond breaking. And also we told the whole reaction mechanism actually goes in steps, and that is what we mean by reaction mechanism. We come to know of the various steps by which a reaction goes to completion from reactants to products, and in between there is formation of intermediates or the transition states. So the transition states which occur during the course of a reaction are supposed to be the states of very high energy. And here comes a factor besides the thermodynamics which becomes deciding for the feasibility or for the rates of the reaction. The energy input required to raise the energy of the starting compounds to that of the transition state is called the activation energy we represent it by EA, the energy barrier of a reaction. So activation energy is another important factor when we talk of the energy considerations during organic reactions. And we've said that the rate of chemical reaction depends on the activation energy, but to cross the activation energy barrier is the most crucial part of any reaction. Where do and how do the molecules get this energy? To cross that activation energy barrier is the question to be seen. The molecules also collide amongst themselves, and due to these collisions there is more kinetic energy amongst the molecules and more probability of the molecules to break this activation energy barrier to lead to the products. And in fact, this activation energy and all those such considerations lead to our second consideration while we are studying this. We call it as the kinetics or the kinetic aspect of organic reactions. The kinetics of any reaction is governed by the rate law, because kinetics is the one which tells about the rate or the speed of a reaction. So it is important to see what do we mean by the rate law. The rate law can, for a general reaction, be represented in a number of ways. We've put only one way of stating the rate law, wherein we take a general reaction like A plus B giving products. We will see that the rate can be stated in the form of rate of change of concentration of A with time, or rate of change of B again with time, and of course it could be rationalized in terms of rate of change in the concentration of products with time. But obvious that the concentration of A and B over the period of time would diminish, and the rate, the amount or the concentration of products with increase with time. If we consider the reactants only, the rate law can be written as rate is proportional to the concentration of A and the concentration of B to the power. These are the powers which are given to the concentrations. So we can state the rate law as small k with concentration of A and concentration of B with their powers on both the concentration terms. These two powers or the exponents in the rate law represent the order of the reaction with respect to reactants in the square brackets. You may be knowing that these square brackets, of course, as I mentioned also, are the concentrations of the respective reactants, and these, the rate mentioned in terms of the exponents m and n, we call these exponents as the order of a reaction. The order of a reaction is actually an experimentally measured quantity. It is not only the number of molecules which are participating. The kinetics of any reaction and also the activation energy of the reaction can be rationalized by considering two important theories of kinetics, which we call as the collision theory and the transition state theory. We mentioned before that the molecules, because are in motion, they have kinetic energy, so they are continuously colliding with each other. We have to see that what does it lead to. What does the collision theory say? The collision theory says that during a reaction, the reacting molecules collide with each other and exchange their energies. So during the course of energy, whatever number of molecules are they become energetic enough, they are able to cross the energy barrier and lead to the products. So the molecules having sufficient energy undergo reaction, and the amount of energy that the molecules must possess to undergo reaction by collision is called as the activation energy. So we are putting this activation energy in different forms. We are sometimes saying that it is actually the transition state which bears the highest energy. Again, we say that this highest energy is the activation energy, which should be crossed while the reaction is proceeding. So this is what the collision theory says, and this can be very well understood by seeing the Maxwell's distribution of molecular energies in this particular diagram. So this particular diagram explains the dependence of temperature on the molecular energies. The y-axis explains gives the number of molecules, and this axis shows the average energy of molecules. As you can see, when the temperature is low at T1 temperature, we have some molecules which possess activation energy. When we increase the temperature, we would notice that this curve shifts a little more, and we have more number of molecules which possess higher activation energy. So this is the fraction of molecules actually with greater energy than the activation energy. What will it mean is that on increasing temperature, we have more number of molecules which will possess energy enough to cross the activation energy barrier. So we can conclude that increase in temperature increases the rate. What does the transition state theory say? According to the transition state theory, which gives a qualitative picture of the energies as the reaction takes place, that a reaction undergoes various steps, and those steps involve the formation of transition state, or we call it as an activated complex. Transition state is the state of maximum free energy, as was mentioned earlier also, and the reaction to give products, the reactants must cross this energy barrier. The theories which have been mentioned as the kinetic theories, that is the collision and the transition state theory, can be understood well by drawing their potential energy diagrams. The potential energy diagrams represent the energy changes in the course of a reaction, that is, when the reactant molecules react to form the products. So this y-axis here represents the potential energy, which is actually an equivalent of, in a way, the enthalpy, and the x-axis shows the reaction coordinate. The reaction coordinate means which states the course of the reaction. So the reactants may be at any state of energy, and when they proceed through the reaction, the transition state has the maximum energy, and we call this energy as the activation energy of the particular reaction. When the reactants are forming products, they are always lower in energy as compared to reactants, then only the reaction proceeds in forward direction. So if we explain this a little more, potential energy diagrams, x-axis is called reaction coordinate, y-axis represents the potential energy. The difference in energies of transition states and the reactants is called free energy of activation, and it is represented with a hash. The potential energy diagram depends on the nature of the reaction. There could be two possibilities when we are drawing the potential energy diagrams for endothermic reactions and the exothermic reactions. We know that endothermic reaction involves absorption of energy. If you look into the diagram, the reactants are at a much lower energy. Transition state, obviously, when the reaction is proceeding, will have higher energy, which is the activation energy, and the products have higher energy as compared to that of the reactants. That means there is a lot of energy which is required to be given to the reaction for the reaction to move in the forward direction. The energy of the products is more than that of the reactants, and energy is absorbed. This is the way we represent the potential energy diagram for an endothermic reaction. Similarly, for an exothermic reaction, it will be just an opposite case wherein the reactants will be at a higher energy and the products will be at a lower energy. Obviously, the energy of the reaction will show this kind of a potential energy diagram wherein energy is released, and the transition state as usual will have the highest energy, which we call as the activation energy. There are two-step reactions also, and potential energy diagrams can be used to represent this particular type of reaction wherein two steps are involved, and in such reactions we have an intermediate also involved. The intermediate during a two-step reaction has a lower energy as compared to the transition state. So how do we represent the potential energy diagram is that the reactant first shows one transition state which is higher in energy, and it comes to an intermediate stage. We talked about intermediates in our previous episodes. The intermediates are actually actual existing species, because they are lower in energy as compared to transition states, so they are more stable. And the transition states have a very small lifetime, almost negligible. They the reaction passes through the transition state, comes to a stable intermediate stage, goes again to the other transition state and leads finally to the products. And for the reaction wherein we have products at a higher energy level as compared to the reactants, we can still represent it through the potential energy diagram the way it is shown here. So in this case, the activation energy of the second step is more than that of the first step, as can be seen. So the curve is at a higher temperature. And here another thing which comes into picture is that we decide on which is the rate determining step. So the slowest step becomes the rate determining step in all the cases, in all the chemical reactions or the organic reactions, while we are considering their reaction mechanism. And in the first case, we see that the first step is slow, so it is the rate determining step, while in the second case, the second step is the slower step, being higher in energy, so it becomes the rate determining step. So this is what we've seen through this presentation, that both thermodynamic and kinetic considerations are very important when we are talking about the feasibility of the reaction, the extent of the reaction, as well as the rate of the reaction. And as we saw, that the rate of the reaction generally is decided by the kinetics of the reactions, which is governed by two theories, the collision and the transition state theory, and also that temperature plays an important role while we are considering the organic reactions, wherein depending upon which is the slower step during the course of a reaction, we decide on the rate determining step also. In the last episode of this unit, we shall look into all those factors which tell us the exact mechanism of an organic reaction, the ways by which we are able to trap the intermediates or decide on what is exactly going on in a reaction.